Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to kick off our presentation today. The topic is studying vegetation, and I hope you'll find it both interesting and insightful. We'll be exploring different methods for analyzing plant life, understanding ecosystems, and the importance of vegetation in our environment. So, let's dive in and discover what makes vegetation such a fascinating subject. Today, we're going to talk about studying vegetation. Now, an important concept to understand is that a community is a larger unit than a population. When we say community, we're referring to all the different species living together in a specific area. This can vary greatly in size. It might be a tiny patch of land or even a small water body, or it could be an extensive forest stretching over many square kilometers. The key point here is that the size of a community can really differ, depending on the ecosystem we're studying. Recognizing this helps us appreciate the diversity and complexity of vegetation across different environments, which is essential for understanding how these systems function within the broader landscape. Today, I want to talk about the different types of communities we see in this context. Essentially, there are two main categories. First, we have the minor communities. These are communities that are heavily influenced by their neighboring communities. You can think of them as being more dependent or reactive, shaped significantly by inputs from those around them. Then, on the other hand, we have the major communities. These are more self-sufficient and tend to operate independently of their habitat. They have a certain level of resilience and stability, which allows them to sustain themselves without as much external influence. Understanding this distinction is crucial, because it helps us see how different communities interact and adapt within their environment. It also highlights the importance of supporting the more dependent communities and recognizing the strengths of the major ones as part of the overall ecosystem. The range of environment that the taxa can tolerate is called as ecological amplitude. Now, this concept is really important because it helps us understand how adaptable a species is to different environmental conditions. In other words, it tells us the breadth of conditions, like temperature, humidity, or soil type, that a species can survive and thrive in. This can vary greatly from one species to another. Some might have a very narrow ecological amplitude, meaning they thrive only in very specific conditions, while others have a broad ecological amplitude, allowing them to adapt to a wide range of environments. Understanding ecological amplitude is crucial because it links directly to a species' ability to survive in changing environments and also informs us about their potential distribution. So, as we move forward, keep in mind that this concept helps us grasp the resilience and adaptability of different taxa within their ecosystems. So, when we talk about the nature of a plant community at any given location, there are several key factors that come into play. First, we have the species content, which essentially refers to the variety of plant species that are present in that area. This diversity influences how the community functions and how resilient it is to changes. Next is the ecological amplitude, which describes the range of environmental conditions that a particular species can tolerate. Some plants are very specialized, thriving within narrow conditions, while others are more adaptable and can survive across a broader spectrum. Then we have the climate, which is a major driver. Temperature, rainfall, humidity, all these climatic factors shape which plants can survive and flourish in a given place. Finally, soil and biotic influences also play a crucial role. The soil's nutrients, texture, and pH affect plant growth, while interactions with other living organisms, like animals, fungi, and microbes, add another layer of influence. All these factors are interconnected and together determine the composition and structure of the plant community. Understanding this helps us grasp how ecosystems develop and how they might respond to environmental changes. Let's talk about a fascinating concept in ecology called the ecotone. This is the zone of vegetation that marks the boundary where one type of community transitions into another. Think of it as a kind of natural border between different ecosystems. Now, what's interesting is how these communities merge with each other in these adjacent areas. Sometimes, the transition is quite sharp, like a clear edge where one habitat ends and another begins. Other times, the change is more gradual, with a smooth blending of species and vegetation types. Understanding ecotones is important because they often serve as zones of high biodiversity and ecological activity. They can also be areas of interaction, competition, and even migration for various species. So, in the broader context of our presentation, recognizing these transition zones helps us appreciate the complexity and interconnectedness of different ecosystems. It highlights how nature doesn't always have clear-cut boundaries, but rather, a continuum that supports diverse life forms. This slide doesn't contain enough information. That's why we're moving to the next slide. Synecology is a fascinating branch of ecology that focuses on studying groups of organisms and the factors that influence them. It's essentially about understanding how different living organisms come together in a community and how they interact with their environment. When we talk about synecology, we're looking at the big picture, how these groups of organisms are structured, how they originate, and how they develop over time. It also involves examining how these communities function, what roles different species play, and how they relate to their physical surroundings and other living things. So, the key points here are the origin, structure, development, functioning, and relationships of these communities with their environment. All of these aspects help us understand the complex web of life in a specific area at a given time, which is crucial for grasping the overall health and dynamics of ecosystems. This holistic view ties directly into our broader theme of understanding ecological balance and sustainability. When we look at the characteristics of a vegetational community, the first aspect to consider is its community architecture. This refers to the overall structure and organization of the plant community, including how different species are arranged in space and how they interact with each other. Next, we have foliage geometry or leaf structure, which influences how plants capture sunlight and perform photosynthesis. The leaf area index is another critical factor. It measures the amount of leaf surface area in a given volume of space, essentially indicating how densely packed the leaves are and how much overlapping occurs vertically. Phenological events are also vital. They describe the timing of seasonal activities like flowering, leafing, or fruiting, which can vary among species and affect the community's dynamics throughout the year. Understanding the relative phytosociological combination helps us see how different species coexist, compete, or complement each other within the same community. Niche specialization, adjustments, and overlaps are key to understanding how species partition resources. Some species evolve unique niches to minimize competition, while others might share overlaps, leading to complex interactions. Diversity, richness, and evenness tell us about the variety and balance of species present, which are essential for resilience and stability. Nutrient movement, storage, release, and decomposition rates shape the nutrient cycling within the community, affecting plant growth and overall productivity. Succession and stabilization, culminating in a climax community, describe how communities develop and reach a relatively stable state over time. Community biomass and energy productivity reflect the total amount of living material and energy generated by the community, which are indicators of its vitality and ecological function. Lastly, understanding the mechanisms controlling all these aspects, be it environmental factors, biological interactions, or evolutionary adaptations, is fundamental to grasping how vegetational communities persist and evolve. All these characteristics are interconnected and form the foundation of our broader understanding of vegetation dynamics and ecological stability. Let's take a closer look at how communities are classified. Different ecologists have approached this classification from various perspectives, but a key factor they consider is the amount of heat or moisture present in the habitat. This environmental factor plays a crucial role in shaping the types of communities we observe. Essentially, the communities can be grouped based on their habitat conditions. First, we have the hydrophytic communities, which are found in predominantly aquatic environments. Think of ponds, lakes, and marshes. These communities are specially adapted to live in water or very moist conditions. Next, we have the mesophytic communities, which thrive in moderately moist soils. These are more common in areas where moisture isn't excessive, but still sufficient to support a wide variety of plant life, like many grasslands and forest floors. Finally, there are the xerophytic communities. These are adapted to arid or dry conditions, such as deserts or dry slopes, where water is scarce and plants have developed unique adaptations to survive. Understanding these classifications is fundamental because it helps us see how plant communities are closely tied to their environment, whether it's wet, moderately moist, or dry, and how different ecological strategies come into play in each scenario. This classification ties directly into the overall theme of how ecosystems function and adapt to their surroundings. Today, I want to talk about the different types of plant adaptations to their environments, specifically focusing on hydrophytic and mesophytic plants. Hydrophytic plants are those that are adapted to thrive in aquatic or very wet conditions. They often have special features like floating leaves or submerged stems to cope with the water-saturated environment. These adaptations are crucial because they help them survive and reproduce in waterlogged soils where other plants might struggle. On the other hand, we have mesophytic plants. These are plants that prefer moderate conditions, neither too wet nor too dry. They are quite common in areas with balanced moisture levels, like many forest floors and grasslands. Their adaptations allow them to efficiently utilize available water without being overly dependent on constant moisture. Understanding these two groups helps us appreciate how diverse plant life is and how different species have evolved specific features to survive in their unique habitats. Recognizing these distinctions is essential for our broader understanding of plant ecology and environmental adaptation. Today, I want to talk about xerophytic plants. These are plants that have adapted specifically to survive in dry, arid environments where water is scarce. The key characteristic of xerophytes is their ability to conserve water efficiently. They often develop specialized features like thick, fleshy leaves or stems that store water, reducing water loss through evaporation. You might notice that many xerophytes have a small surface area or a coating of wax on their surfaces, which helps minimize moisture loss. Some even have a reduced number of stomata or control their opening to limit water loss during the hottest parts of the day. These adaptations are crucial because they enable plants to thrive where other plants might struggle to survive. They connect to the overall theme of survival strategies in tough environments, showing how life finds a way to adapt and endure even in extreme conditions. Let's explore how plant communities are classified based on their light requirements. Communities that thrive in conditions of abundant light are called heliophytic. These are the sun-loving plants that grow best when there's plenty of sunlight. Conversely, communities that grow in shaded areas are known as sciophytic, which includes plants adapted to low light conditions. But classification isn't limited to just light. We can also categorize communities based on other environmental factors, which influence their overall shape and growth form in specific environments. For example, we have forest communities, which are characterized by dense tree cover and a layered structure, and desert communities, which are adapted to arid conditions with specialized plant forms to conserve water. Understanding these classifications helps us see how different plants and communities adapt to their environments, which ties back to the overall theme of ecological adaptation and diversity. Clements, back in 1916, recognized that communities are not always the same everywhere. He observed that different areas can host different types of communities, and he classified these into two main categories. The first category is what he called seral communities, which are characterized by ongoing change. These are communities that are in a state of transition, constantly evolving over time. The second category is stable or climax communities, which tend to remain relatively stable once they are established. These communities reach a sort of equilibrium and stay consistent unless disrupted. Understanding this classification helps us see how communities develop and how ecosystems progress through different stages toward stability. It's a key concept in ecology because it shows the dynamic nature of communities and how they relate to the overall theme of ecological succession and stability. Now let's talk about how communities are named. Typically, seral communities, those that represent different stages of ecological succession, are indicated by a specific suffix ending, which is "wise." So, when you see a community name ending in "wise," it usually points to a seral stage, a transitional phase in the development of an ecosystem. On the other hand, the climax communities, which are the stable, mature stages of an ecosystem, are generally identified by the ending "tion." Recognizing these suffixes helps us understand the community's position within the successional process. Connecting this to the overall theme, understanding these naming conventions gives us insight into how ecosystems develop and change over time. It's a simple but effective way to classify and describe different communities based on their ecological roles and stages. Now, let's talk about the characters of communities. When we evaluate communities, we consider two main aspects: qualitative characters and quantitative characters. These two dimensions help us get a comprehensive understanding of a community's nature and strength. First, qualitative characters refer to the qualities and characteristics that define a community's social fabric. This includes aspects like social cohesion, cultural values, traditions, and the overall sense of unity among community members. Think of qualitative characters as the personality traits of a community. They tell us about the quality of relationships and social bonds that hold the community together. On the other hand, we have quantitative characters, which are more measurable and numerical in nature. These include factors such as population size, density, and the economic resources available. Quantitative characters give us a way to assess the scale and material aspects of a community, providing data that can be analyzed statistically. Connecting these points to our overall theme, understanding both qualitative and quantitative characters allows us to form a balanced view of a community. It's not just about numbers, it's also about the social quality that makes a community vibrant and resilient. Recognizing this dual perspective helps us in planning, development, and fostering sustainable communities. When we talk about qualitative characters, we're focusing on the structure and composition of plant communities that we can observe visually. These characteristics include things like the types of plants present, how they are arranged, and their overall appearance. The key point here is that all of this can be described just by looking, without needing to take any measurements. This approach is what we call a qualitative method, and it's generally much simpler than a quantitative analysis, where you actually measure things like plant height, cover, or biomass. The qualitative approach allows us to get a good sense of the community's structure quickly and easily, which can be very useful in many situations. So, in the context of our overall presentation, understanding qualitative characters helps us grasp the basic makeup of plant communities before diving into more detailed, measurement-based analysis. It's a more straightforward way to assess vegetation, especially when detailed measurements aren't feasible. Now, let's explore the qualitative characters of a community. First, we look at the different kinds of species that make up the community. This diversity is crucial because it influences how the community functions and adapts to changes. Next, we consider the stratification of vegetation, which refers to the layers of plant life, like the ground cover, shrubs, and canopy trees. This stratification affects habitat availability and the overall structure of the ecosystem. Moving on, we examine sociability within the community. This describes how species interact with each other, whether they coexist peacefully, compete, or form symbiotic relationships. These interactions are vital for maintaining ecological balance and resilience. Understanding these qualitative traits helps us see not just the composition, but also the dynamics that sustain a healthy, thriving community. It ties into our overall theme of ecosystem stability and biodiversity importance. Let's take a closer look at the stratification of vegetation. When we talk about stratification, we're referring to the different layers or levels of plant life within an ecosystem. This layering is crucial because it affects how species interact, access resources, and coexist. Typically, you'll find several distinct layers, starting from the ground level with grasses and herbs, then moving up to shrubs, and finally the canopy formed by taller trees. Understanding these layers helps us see how biodiversity is structured and maintained. Each layer has its own unique conditions, such as light availability, humidity, and temperature, which influence the types of plants and animals that can thrive there. In the context of our overall theme, stratification showcases the complexity and organization within ecosystems. It reminds us that ecosystems are not just random collections of plants, but highly organized systems with specific roles for each layer. Recognizing this complexity is key when we're considering conservation, management, or studying ecological processes. Let's talk about the kinds of species, which is a very important factor in understanding an area's biodiversity. When we refer to this, we're essentially studying the flora or the different types of species present. Now, to do this effectively, a good knowledge of taxonomy is essential. This means I need to observe the flora carefully, considering factors like the time of year, as some plants are seasonal. Collecting plant materials is also crucial, as it helps in proper identification and study. Systematic studies are then carried out to classify and understand these species better. Herbarium preparation is another key part of this process. It involves pressing and preserving plant specimens for future reference. And all of this should be done throughout the entire year, because plant presence and characteristics can vary with seasons. By understanding the kinds of species in an area, we gain valuable insights into its ecological health and biodiversity, which ties into the overall theme of conservation and habitat assessment. Now, let's move on to the stratification of vegetation. It's important to record the life forms of each species individually, including shrubs, trees, climbers, herbs, forbs, grasses, and others. This detailed recording helps us understand the composition of the vegetation more accurately. You might notice that with the changing seasons, the appearance of vegetation also changes. This variation is simply a reflection of the different phases and growth patterns of the plants. In ecological terms, we call this the aspect of vegetation. To capture this dynamic nature, we need to document the periodicity and phenology of the plants. That means noting down how often a species appears and how its biological activities fluctuate across different seasons and years. This information is crucial because it provides insights into the seasonal behavior and adaptability of various species. By doing so, we can better understand the overall structure and function of the ecosystem. So, in essence, recording these details helps us track how vegetation responds over time, which is central to ecological studies and conservation efforts. Now, let's talk about sociability, which is also known as the nature of groupings. Essentially, it refers to how species are distributed in their environment, whether they grow alone, in patches, in colonies, or are evenly intermixed. To get a sense of this, we often make visual estimates of how individuals are spread out, and we can record the number of individuals accordingly. For example, we might classify them as rare, seldom present, often present, or mostly and generally present. These categories help us understand the abundance and distribution patterns in a more qualitative way. Similarly, terms like rare, less frequent, frequent, and abundant are also useful for describing how common or widespread a species is. Understanding these patterns is important because it ties into the overall theme of how organisms interact with their environment and each other. It gives us insight into their behavior, survival strategies, and ecological roles. So, recognizing whether a species is rare or abundant, or how it's grouped, helps us better understand the dynamics of the ecosystem as a whole. Today, I want to talk about how we measure the occurrence of a species within a community, especially when it's spread across several stands. We use two key terms for this. The first one is constants. Constants, as Johnson defined it in 1983, refers to how often a species appears in different stands of the same community. Essentially, it's about checking how many stands a species occupies, but importantly, we base this on a sample area of a specific size in each stand. So, when we talk about constants, we're really focusing on the consistency of a species across different parts of the community. This helps us understand how widespread or consistent a species is within a given habitat, which ties directly into our broader goal of understanding species distribution and community structure. When we talk about presence, we're referring to how we measure whether a species is actually part of a community. Johnson in 1983 offered a clear way to understand this. He described presence as essentially two things. First, it's about the presence or absence of a species across all the examples or samples we look at within a community. So, if a species shows up in every sample, we say it has high presence. If it's missing in some, then its presence is lower. Secondly, he pointed out that presence can also be expressed as a percentage. This means looking at how often a species appears across different areas within the same community. For example, if we examine several plots or zones within a community, we can calculate the percentage of those areas where the species is found. This gives us a more quantitative measure of its presence. Connecting this to the bigger picture, understanding presence helps us see which species are common and which are rare within a community. It's fundamental for studying biodiversity, species distribution, and how communities function. So, in essence, presence gives us a key insight into the structure and dynamics of ecological communities. Let's consider an example to understand species presence better. Suppose a species is found in 7 out of 10 stands. In that case, we would say its presence is 70%. Now, if we place one quadrat in each stand, the species might not be present in all those stands where it was initially recorded. For example, it could be present in only 5 stands out of the 10, which would give us a constancy of 50%. This highlights an important point. Presence or frequency alone doesn't tell the whole story. That's where the concept of sociability comes in. Sociability reflects how individuals of a species are dispersed across a given area. It's rated on a scale from 1 to 5. A score of 1 means the individuals are growing singly, scattered apart. A 2 indicates they form small, dense clumps. At 3, they appear as small patches or cushions. A 4 suggests small colonies or carpets forming. And finally, a 5 signifies large, almost pure stands, where the species dominates large areas. This scale helps us understand not just how often a species occurs, but also how it is spatially arranged in its environment. This information is crucial for understanding ecological dynamics and the overall community structure. Let's talk about life forms and how different ecologists have proposed various systems to categorize them. When we refer to life forms, we're essentially describing the characteristic vegetative form of a species, which can tell us a lot about how it survives and adapts. For example, BCFT, proposed in 1953, focused on this vegetative aspect, how the plant structure reflects its life strategy. Then, there's SAF from 1983, which introduces a slightly different perspective. It's based on the Ronquier system, emphasizing morphological categories, specifically the position and nature of resting buds. These buds are crucial because they survive unfavorable conditions, like cold or dry seasons, and help the plant regrow when conditions improve. So, in essence, both systems aim to classify plants based on their form and survival strategies, which is very relevant to understanding how different life forms adapt to their environments. This helps us see the big picture of plant ecology and how species are suited to their habitats. Let's take a closer look at some fundamental concepts about plant forms. Johnson in 1983 described the vegetative form of a plant species as its characteristic appearance, such as being a tree, shrub, or herb. These forms are essential because they reflect how plants adapt to their environment. Ronquier's classification of plant life forms, developed in 1934, is actually one of the most widely used systems among ecologists worldwide. It was originally proposed by the Danish botanist Christian Ronquier, who was a pioneer in understanding plant adaptation. Ronquier's ideas go back to 1903, and he emphasized that environmental conditions are the real drivers behind a plant's form. In other words, the shape and structure of a plant are primarily shaped by the environment it faces. He believed that the position and the level of protection of the plant's perinating buds, that is, the buds that survive through adverse seasons, are key to understanding how plants adapt to climate. This focus on bud protection highlights how important survival strategies are in shaping plant life forms. So overall, Ronquier's classification helps us see how plants have evolved different forms based on environmental challenges, especially how they protect their vital parts during tough conditions. This understanding connects directly to our broader theme of plant adaptation and resilience. Ronquier considered the position and the degree of protection to perinating buds during the adverse season as the principal feature of plant adaptation to climate. Based on this idea, he classified higher plants into 5 major life form classes. These classes are designed to reflect how different plants protect their buds and survive through tough conditions. The first one is the phanerophytes, or P, which are plants with buds located high above the ground, often on trees or tall shrubs. Next, we have the chamophytes, or CH, where buds are close to the ground but still above the soil's surface, like small shrubs. Then there are the hemicryptophytes, H, with buds at soil level, typically protected by litter or snow. Following that are the cryptophytes, CR, which have buds below the soil surface, well shielded from the environment. And finally, the thaurophytes, or TH, which are annual plants that survive unfavorable seasons as seeds, completing the spectrum of plant adaptation strategies. This classification helps us understand how plants adapt their reproductive and survival strategies to different climatic conditions, tying into the overall theme of plant adaptation to climate. Today, I want to talk about phanerophytes. These are the trees, shrubs, and climbers that you often see in various landscapes. The key feature of these plants is that their growing buds are located quite high up on the upright shoots, well above the ground level. Because of this, these buds are usually less protected from environmental stresses like cold or drought. You'll find phanerophytes mostly in tropical regions where conditions are warmer and more stable. In fact, their numbers tend to decrease as you move towards temperate and polar regions, where harsher climates make it more challenging for such plants to survive. Understanding where these plants thrive helps us see how plant adaptations are closely linked to their environment, fitting into the bigger picture of how different plant types are suited to specific climate zones. Today, let's take a closer look at phanerophytes. These are a fascinating group of plants characterized primarily by their tall, woody structures that typically survive through multiple years. The key point here is that they have prominent, exposed buds or growth points that are usually well above the ground level. This means they can be easily identified because their buds are visible and not hidden beneath soil or leaf litter. Phanerophytes include many of the trees and large shrubs we see in forests and woodlands. Their ability to survive over long periods, often decades or even centuries, is thanks to their woody, durable stems and branches. This concept ties into the overall theme of plant adaptations and survival strategies. By understanding phanerophytes, we gain insight into how certain plants dominate their environments, especially in regions with specific climate conditions. They stand out as a vital component of many ecosystems, contributing to biodiversity and habitat stability. So, in essence, phanerophytes are the giants of the plant world, with their exposed buds and long lifespan making them a key focus in understanding plant ecology and adaptation. Let's talk about chamophytes. These are plants that are typically found in cold regions or at high altitudes. One of their key features is where their buds are located. They're close to the ground, usually no more than 25 centimeters high. This close-to-the-ground positioning helps protect the buds from harsh environmental conditions. For example, plants like Trifolium repens and Buchlodactyloids are good examples. You'll find them in temperate regions, and they share this characteristic of low-lying buds. An interesting aspect of chamophytes is how they handle cold seasons. Often, the aerial parts of these plants die back during winter, and the dead shoots actually serve as a cover and protection for the perinating buds underneath. Then, come spring, these plants start their new growth cycle, producing fresh vegetative shoots. This adaptation is quite remarkable because it allows them to survive extreme conditions and resume growth annually. Connecting this to the broader theme of plant adaptations, camophytes exemplify how plants modify their structure and growth habits to thrive in challenging environments. Camophytes are a fascinating group of plants, and understanding their characteristics helps us appreciate how plants adapt to different environments. Essentially, camophytes are small, woody plants where the buds are located just above the ground, typically within a few centimeters. This close-to-the-ground positioning offers them some advantages, such as protection from harsh weather conditions like strong winds and extreme temperatures. You'll often find them in environments where such protection is beneficial. One of the key points to remember is that these plants are well suited to survive in challenging conditions due to their low stature and protective features. They are an important part of the overall plant community because they can thrive where larger plants might struggle. Connecting this to our broader theme, camophytes exemplify how plants adapt morphologically to their surroundings, ensuring survival across a range of habitats. Recognizing these adaptations helps us understand the diversity of plant life and the strategies they use to persist in different ecological niches. Hemicryptophytes are a fascinating group of plants that are primarily found in cold regions. What makes them unique is how they survive harsh climates. Their perinating buds are located just below the soil's surface, which helps protect them from extreme weather conditions. This positioning is crucial because it shields the buds from cold temperatures, wind, and other adverse factors that could otherwise damage them. This group includes both biennial and perennial herbs, meaning some complete their life cycle in 2 years, while others live for multiple years. An interesting point to note is that the vegetative growth and the visible, or aerial, parts of these plants are usually only prominent during the warm season. So, during colder months, these plants mainly exist in a protected, dormant state underground. Understanding hemicryptophytes helps us appreciate how plants adapt to challenging environments, ensuring their survival across seasons and connecting to the broader theme of plant adaptations in different climates. Hemicryptophytes are a fascinating group of plants, and they play an important role in many ecosystems. The key feature of hemicryptophytes is that their buds are located at or just below the soil's surface, which helps them survive harsh conditions like winter or drought. This positioning protects the buds from extreme weather and herbivores, ensuring their survival year after year. You can think of them as plants that have adapted by keeping their growth points close to the ground, almost like a hidden reserve. This adaptation is particularly significant when we consider plant survival strategies overall. Hemicryptophytes are often herbaceous, meaning they die back seasonally but regrow from these protected buds. They are commonly found in temperate zones where seasonal changes are pronounced. Connecting this to our overall theme of plant adaptations, hemicryptophytes exemplify how plants modify their growth forms to cope with environmental stresses. Their underground buds serve as a kind of natural insurance policy, allowing them to withstand unfavorable conditions and quickly regenerate when the environment becomes more favorable. So, understanding hemicryptophytes gives us insight into the resilience and diversity of plant life in variable climates. Now, let's move on to the cryptophytes. These plants are often called geophytes, which means they have some unique adaptations. You see, their buds are typically buried deep in the soil, or they take the form of bulbs or rhizomes. This underground storage is crucial for their survival. It allows them to endure long periods of unfavorable weather or harsh climate conditions. In fact, these buds act as the storehouses of the plant, holding essential nutrients and energy. This adaptation makes cryptophytes particularly resilient and well-suited to environments with seasonal or unpredictable weather patterns. So, understanding these features helps us appreciate how these plants thrive despite challenging conditions, fitting into the bigger picture of plant survival strategies. Let's take a closer look at cryptophytes. These are a fascinating group of algae that play a significant role in aquatic ecosystems. What makes cryptophytes particularly interesting is their unique cell structure and pigmentation, which allow them to efficiently perform photosynthesis even in low light conditions. They contain a mix of pigments, including phycobiliproteins, which give them their distinctive colors and help absorb different wavelengths of light. This adaptability makes cryptophytes important primary producers in both freshwater and marine environments. Additionally, they have complex evolutionary origins, showing links to other groups of algae. Overall, cryptophytes exemplify how diverse and adaptable microscopic life can be, fitting into the broader theme of biodiversity and evolutionary innovation in our presentation. Now let's talk about the rhophytes. These are plants that have adapted to survive tough conditions by essentially hiding out in the form of seeds during unfavorable periods. When the environment becomes favorable again, like after rain or during suitable temperatures, they quickly go on to produce flowers and seeds, completing their life cycle. Most thoraphites are classified as annuals, meaning they complete their entire life cycle within a single growing season. You'll typically find these plants in some of the harshest environments, extreme dryness, scorching heat, or even cold regions, where survival is a constant challenge. Understanding these adaptations helps us grasp how different plants have evolved strategies to cope with environmental stresses, which ties into the broader theme of plant survival mechanisms across diverse habitats. Today, I want to talk about the rhophytes. These are a fascinating group of plants. Essentially, the rhophytes are annual plants that complete their life cycle within a single growing season. They survive unfavorable conditions, like dry seasons or cold winters, by going dormant as seeds. When the conditions become favorable again, they quickly sprout, grow, reproduce, and then die back. This strategy allows them to effectively adapt to environments with unpredictable or harsh weather patterns. It's a key survival tactic that ties into our overall theme of how different plants have evolved various mechanisms to thrive in their specific habitats. By understanding the rhophytes, we gain insight into plant resilience and adaptation in seasonal environments. Let's talk about the biological spectrum. Ronquier in 1934 described it as the ratio of different species' life forms, either in terms of their numbers or percentages within any given floristic community. You can think of this as a way to understand how various plant types are distributed in a specific area. This concept is also known as the phytoclimatic spectrum, emphasizing the relationship between plant life forms and climatic conditions. Later, in 1983, SAF defined it as a statement that shows, for the flora of a particular community or region, the percentage of species belonging to each life form. So, essentially, both definitions focus on illustrating the composition of plant life forms in a community, but one emphasizes the ratio or percentage, making it easier to analyze the dominance or prevalence of certain forms. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding the biological spectrum helps us grasp how plant communities are structured and how they adapt to their environment. It provides a snapshot of the ecological balance and diversity within a region, which is vital for conservation and ecological studies. Let's talk about BCFT, which stands for Ronquier's Biological Climate and Flora term, introduced back in 1953. It's a way to describe the relative percentages of different life forms, like trees, shrubs, herbs, in a specific area. Essentially, it gives us a snapshot of the plant life structure in that location. Ronquier, in 1934, took this concept further by creating a normal biological spectrum for the world's phanerogamic flora, that is, seed-producing plants. This spectrum acts as a kind of standard or benchmark for comparison. What's really interesting is that when we study a particular region's biological spectrum, we compare it with this normal spectrum. Usually, we find that at least one life form in the region has a significantly higher percentage than it does in the normal spectrum. This comparison helps us understand the unique environmental conditions or ecological influences shaping that region. It's a useful tool in ecology for assessing how different regions deviate from the norm, and it ties into our broader theme of understanding plant distribution and adaptation across different environments. So, for example, Ronquier in 1934 observed some interesting patterns in plant life forms across different environments. He found that in desert regions, the percentage of the rhophytes, Those are annual plants that complete their life cycle quickly, ranges from about 42 to 50%. This is quite a contrast to the normal spectrum, where you'd expect only around 13%. It makes sense because in deserts, plants need to be quick and adaptable to survive the harsh conditions. On the other hand, in the temperate climates of central Switzerland, he noted that hemicryptophytes, plants with buds at soil level, constitute roughly 49 to 51% of the flora. That's significantly higher compared to just 26% in the normal spectrum. These examples really highlight how plant life forms are adapted to their environments, which ties back to our overall theme of ecological strategies and plant distribution. It's fascinating to see how different climates influence which types of plants dominate, isn't it? Let's take a closer look at the structural description. Here, we're focusing on understanding the core framework that underpins the entire system. It's important because it helps us see how all the components fit together and work in harmony. When we talk about structure, we're referring to the key elements that define the organization and relationships within the system. Recognizing these aspects allows us to identify strengths, weaknesses, and areas for improvement. By thoroughly analyzing the structure, we gain insights into how the system functions as a whole, which is essential for making informed decisions and strategic adjustments. Remember, understanding the structure is fundamental to grasping the bigger picture and ensuring effective implementation. Dan's set slide. Je vais parler de la description structurelle des communautés végétales selon Dansereau in 1957. Il a proposé une façon de comprendre comment ces communautés sont composées. Il a identifié 6 composants clés qui constituent une communauté végétale. Premièrement, la forme de vie, ou life form, c'est-à-dire si la plante est un arbre, un arbuste, une herbe, ou une liane, par exemple. Deuxièmement, la taille des plantes, qui est importante pour comprendre leur rôle dans l'écosystème. Troisièmement, leur fonction, c'est-à-dire si quelles apportent à l'écosystème, comme la production de biomasse, la fixation de l'azote, ou la stabilisation du sol. Quatrièmement, la forme de leurs fuels, si qui peut influencer leur capacité à capter la lumière ou à réduire la perte d'eau. Cinquièmement, la texture des fuels, qui peut aussi jouer un rôle dans la conservation de l'eau ou la protection contre les herbivores. Et enfin, la couverture du canopé, ou la densité de la végétation en haut de la communauté, qui influence la lumière qui pénètre au sol et le microclimat. En résumé, ces 6 composants nous donnent une vue d'ensemble très détaillée de la structure d'une communauté végétale. Comprendre ces éléments, c'est saisir comment la communauté s'organise et fonctionne dans son environment. Let's take a closer look at the notion and symbol associated with different categories. In each of the 6 categories we've discussed, there are several subgroups, each characterized by a specific notion and symbol. For example, when we focus on life forms, we can see 6 distinct categories, each represented by a letter. T stands for trees, F for shrubs, H for herbs, M for bryophytic forms, E for epiphytes, and L for lianas. These symbols help us quickly identify and categorize different types of life forms based on their unique characteristics. Recognizing these symbols and notions is crucial because it allows us to understand the diversity within each category and how they relate to the overall ecosystem. It also helps in simplifying complex biological classifications, making it easier to communicate and analyze ecological data effectively. So, understanding these symbols is fundamental in grasping the broader patterns and relationships in our study of natural forms. Let's talk about the size of plants first. There are 3 main categories to consider here. The first one is T, which stands for tall plants. These are the ones that reach significant heights and often dominate the landscape. Next is M, for medium-sized plants. These are versatile and commonly used in various settings. Finally, we have L, representing low-height plants. These are usually ground covers or small shrubs that stay closer to the ground. Recognizing these size categories helps us understand how plants fit into different environments and functions. Moving on to plant functions, there are 4 key categories to keep in mind. The first is D, which stands for deciduous plants. These plants shed their leaves seasonally, usually in autumn, as a way to conserve water and survive adverse conditions. Then there's S, for semi-deciduous plants. These lose their leaves for shorter periods or less extensively, depending on environmental factors. The third category is E, or evergreen plants, which keep their leaves throughout the year, providing constant greenery and often serving as year-round visual interest. Lastly, we have J, which indicates evergreen succulents or evergreen leafless plants. These are specially adapted to dry environments and have unique adaptations like leafless stems or succulent leaves to store water. Understanding these categories, both size and function, helps us design and select plants more effectively, ensuring they serve their intended roles in landscapes, whether for aesthetic appeal, environmental benefits, or functional purposes. This classification system is a fundamental part of plant ecology and landscape planning, connecting directly to the overall theme of creating sustainable and visually appealing environments. Now let's take a look at leaf shape, which is a key characteristic in plant identification. There are 6 main types of leaf shapes we should be familiar with. First, the needle or spine-shaped leaves, represented by the letter N. These are typically thin and pointed, often found in conifers. Next, we have graminoids, marked by the G, which are grass-like leaves with a linear form. Then, there's the medium or small-sized leaves, indicated by a, which are quite common across various plant species. Broad leaves, represented by H, are wider and often associated with trees like oaks and maples. Compound leaves, shown by V, consist of multiple leaflets attached to a single stem, a feature seen in plants like acacias. And finally, thalloid leaves, marked by Q, which have a flattened, plate-like structure. Recognizing these shapes helps us understand plant adaptations and their ecological roles. Moving on to leaf texture, this is another important aspect to consider in plant identification. The textures of leaves can vary significantly and tell us a lot about the environment the plant is adapted to. For example, F stands for filmy leaves, which are delicate and thin, often found in plants from humid environments. Z indicates membranous leaves, which are somewhat soft and flexible. X refers to sclerophylls, characterized by tough, leathery textures that help reduce water loss in dry conditions. Lastly, K stands for succulents, which have thick, fleshy leaves specialized for water storage. Recognizing these textures not only helps in identifying plants, but also provides insights into their ecological strategies and survival mechanisms. Now let's talk about canopy cover and how we recognize it. When we describe canopy cover, we use specific symbols to represent different types. For example, a B indicates a barren area with little or no vegetation. An I stands for discontinuous canopy cover, meaning the vegetation is patchy or broken up. The P symbolizes tufts or bunches, which are small, clustered groups of plants. Lastly, a C represents continuous canopy cover, where the vegetation forms a uniform, unbroken layer. Understanding these symbols is really useful because they help us create a community profile. Essentially, they allow us to better grasp the qualitative character of plant communities, how dense or sparse they are, and how they are arranged. This kind of detailed understanding is crucial when we're analyzing ecosystems or planning conservation efforts. So, in summary, these notations are simple but powerful tools that help us visualize and interpret the structure of plant communities, making our ecological assessments more accurate and insightful. So, as we wrap up, let's briefly touch on the concept of barren areas and the presence of tufts or bunches. When we refer to barren, we're talking about areas that are quite sparse in vegetation, often with little to no cover. These zones can be significant in understanding how ecosystems function or how certain land management practices impact plant growth. Then we see tufts or bunches. These are essentially clusters of plants or grasses that tend to grow together in tight groups. Recognizing these patterns helps us understand plant distribution and how species might compete or coexist in a given environment. Connecting this to our overall theme, understanding these spatial patterns, whether barren spaces or bunches, can inform better land use decisions, conservation strategies, and habitat management. It's about seeing the bigger picture of how plant communities are structured and how they adapt to their surroundings.